This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Ann Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Ann Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our thoughtful bold leader today joins us from the southern state of Florida in the United States of America. Her life at 17 went from a wonderland into a living nightmare. Separated from her family, she escaped the Bosnian War in former Yugoslavia and spent 3 years in an Austrian refugee camp. With the help of the Lutheran Church, she made her way to the United States and became an immigrant refugee. She held down 6 to 7 jobs in her 20s and 30s, from being a janitor to babysitting and warehousing. After a career in consumer financial services, she moved into academia. Today, she is the dean of the Forbes School of Business and Technology at the University of Arizona Global Campus. She is a Fulbright specialist, a full-time professor, and a Globe researcher who has contributed to large-scale research in 160 countries on cultural practices, leadership ideals, and interpersonal trust. She has co-authored a book and co-created an index on perception. In 2021, People Hum named her in the top 200 leaders to follow, and Global Leaders Today named her as one of the Global 100 Inspiring Leaders. Stay tuned as you learn more about her escape from war, her rise to the top, and why a refugee is a refugee. Anyone, anywhere, and anytime could face a similar fate. We warmly welcome my dear friend, Dr. Maja Zelihic, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. Maja, thank you so much for joining me today. It's wonderful to see you again.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for having me. Greetings to all of your listeners.
And viewers.
And viewers.
And viewers, yes, absolutely. I loved our first conversation. I'm so struck by your remarkable background and where you come from, having grown up in the former country of Yugoslavia. And of course, Yugoslavia has its own challenging history. Can you take us back in time? What really marked your childhood? What were the most difficult moments? And when did you decide to leave?
I personally feel that I had the most idyllic childhood that one can absolutely imagine. And sometimes as I was reflecting back on my childhood, I wondered if it was really that perfect, or was it perfect in comparison to what happened afterwards? So be that as it may, I grew up in a family. I was the only child, just parents and grandparents. My parents were very young, and they were actually in pursuit of different business ventures. My father was in sports. My mom was she was running a very well accomplished and famous pub in the city, actually in the city of Sarajevo. So they were they were entrepreneurs within the context of a socialist country. So it was you and I talked a little bit about Yugoslavia being a bit of a bipolar society, socialist at its very core, but you could still be an entrepreneur, and we were somewhat Western oriented. We were not part of the Eastern Bloc. So the most influential people in my life were my grandparents, because I spent the most time with my grandparents as my parents were working outside of the home, and my grandfather in particular. So my childhood was marked by this incredibly strong, well-educated and powerful grandfather who was a pivotal person when it comes to my education, my formative years. And a couple of times in different shows, I mentioned this whole concept of me waking up and, playing a party of chess with him and then discussing different topics. And he was asking me to solve some of the world problems when I was 4 or 5 years old. I thought that was very common. I thought that was very normal. And yet again, as I mentioned in the past, I realized that was not necessarily a standard upbringing when I started going to school, because I realized not every young girl had those type of conversations with their grandfather. Great education. Some of the Eastern European education, I'm a bit biased. I'm going to venture out to say that whatever we were lacking in certain things in areas of life, we were overcompensating with the strength of our educational system. So I felt that I loved school. I was always a nerd, and I had lots of friends, very well accepted in the community. I honestly, and I know I cannot think of one single moment that was even remotely traumatic or difficult for me. Maybe in comparison to certain more developed countries, perhaps there was something we might have lacked, but if you don't know what you're lacking, you're not craving that. We were able to travel, unlike many other Eastern European countries. We were able to be exposed to different cultures, and everything came to an end when I was 17 and a half. That's when the nightmare started that impacted that whole region. Well, the nightmare started maybe a year prior, but the Bosnia was impacted when I was 17 and a half. And it just, the war started, the turmoil, within days we lost our house. It was within days. Within days we became refugees in our own city. Within days my family was separated, with my parents being in one part of the city, and I was with my parents, my grandparents being in another part of the city. Us trying to rescue, for the lack of better words, my grandparents to join us, at least for us to be together. Us being in the shelter. I mean, everything was happening from like Friday, me thinking about a school play on Monday, to us being in a shelter and separated as a family, and we lost a house. We're talking a span of 5 to 7 days.
Can you remember what date that was?
I do believe that April 6, 1992, I was supposed to have my school play, because we were actually rehearsing it on Friday prior to that Monday. And that was my best day in high school. We were doing like a final rehearsal, and I felt incredibly accomplished. And then a boy who I really, really liked came by, and he told me that I looked wonderful on stage. And that gave me some sort of hope that perhaps there is some sort of a dating future for us. And I do remember that last moment in high school being so beautiful. I've never seen him again. I've never done the play. And I actually went back to that school 20 years later.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of so it happened overnight, the whole situation, seemingly overnight. I'm sure the elders, the older people were following politics and understanding what's cooking behind the scenes. But I was a teenager. My focus was, school, boys, where are we going to go out? I mean, I was not watching politics, and I was not involved in those type of things. So for me, that was, and for my generation, that was just a complete shock.
You mentioned at some point that you then tried to escape and the borders were closed and you escaped to near death. Can you take us back to that moment in time? Where were you? What happened? Can you share a little more about that?
I was at first staying within the region, because as naive as many of us were, for whatever reason, we were under the assumption that, I remember my dad, and of course, nowadays we can only question that statement. So many of our adults were telling us, so this will end in just a few weeks. People will come to their senses. We're going to continue living together. So the assumption was, if you have relatives, if you have family members somewhere where it was still peaceful, let us send, whoever you can send, children, usually women, to those relatives. So I stayed within the region. I stayed and spent some time with my uncle and his family. And the more and more the situation has gotten worse. And it, at some point of time, as young as I was, I realized this is not getting better. And there is a lot of guilt associated with that realization, because there's so many folks that stayed in the country and they suffered tremendously, and from people being killed to women being raped, which was a huge issue during the situation in Bosnia in particular, to people being disabled for the rest of their lives. So you do have that survivor's guilt. Be that as it may, putting that guilt aside as I'm talking to you, I made a decision to go west. I did not have my goal was not really well shaped in my mind. Going west was the only thought I had. I didn't know where do I go? So, I've heard of a Red Cross accepting some refugees. I've heard of, there were multiple refugee centers already all across Europe. And in one of those situations, I've boarded a bus and I went through Hungary towards, my goal was Germany. I never made it to Germany. I ended up in Austria. So in between. So my actual ultimate goal was Germany. I had my childhood friend in Germany. She had an apartment with her whole family, and she said that, we can share. And my ultimate goal was not landing in a refugee center. I ended up landing in a refugee center. So so I stayed there for 3.5 years. And with 30 plus refugees, I say 30 plus, we always said more than 30, sometimes 32, 35. And that's where I spent my refugee years, primarily in Austria, in Innsbruck. And I'm alone. I do have some family members actually from my mom's side of the family that were also at the center. But as far as the family unit, I was alone, and which presented itself with some difficulties, because we were getting the Red Cross aid and stuff along those lines. So when you're alone, when you get just that, you have to supplement. So I was supplementing by doing odd jobs, janitorial jobs, and babysitting. Those were jobs that I was able to obtain and do on the side in order to sustain myself and whatever I needed.
Yeah. So what was the day you decided to leave, and can you take us back to that day, how you felt at the time, and what was the conversation you had with your family?
I had no conversation with my family. My family at that point of time was in Bosnia. I got a letter from my mom, and that was the day when the letters would travel for a long time, but in that letter, she indicated that she was wounded for the second time. And later on, piecing together my grandmother's letter and my mom's letter, I realized that my mom was incredibly lucky to survive. She was severely wounded, and that was her second time being wounded as a civilian in the war. And reading her letter just basically took away any hope I had for the region, which is horrible to say because there are so many people. Yet again, I really want to preface this by saying so many people stayed, but I just felt that that was my mom's second time my mom being wounded was actually where I realized I just have to leave. I felt suffocated. I just needed to leave. I was young. Well, when you're young, you're quite naive, very optimistic. Leaving, as so many of us had, with no plan, no contingency plan, with some sort of I have a friend in Germany, if I make it there, kind of that's, thinking about it now that I'm in my 40s with kids and stuff. I mean, I think that would be a much harder decision if I was with a family. So no, I didn't run it by anyone.
Yeah.
So it's
You spoke a little about time in Austria and being a refugee in Austria. Is there a particular event you can take us back to in Austria that really marked and shaped your life and how you view the world today?
Well, we talked about a little bit about the refugee crisis currently in the world when you and I talked earlier, and we were reflecting on the status of Ukraine refugees, and we were drawing some parallels to the refugees that were coming from other parts of the world, such as certain areas in Africa, Middle East, and how there's a difference in treatments. So what I was telling you is that I cannot even imagine what some refugees are going through now, but it was very hard for the refugees from the former Yugoslavia region in Europe in general in the 90s. Everything in life is comparison, and everything in life is putting things in perspective. So maybe our status was better than being a Syrian refugee in Denmark today as a scenario. We talked about that situation. But for me, with the understanding that they were really supportive Austrian organizations that were helping us out, also including the Red Cross, there was a lot of animosity when it comes to regular Austrians towards the refugee population. There's always that ancient old notion of someone's taking our jobs or someone's taking our space, which was yet again semi-ridiculous. And we see this in the United States right now. And the jobs that I was taking were not the ones that any Austrian would like to do. When I was dating my husband at the time, he was working at this farm, and in ice cold water, he was washing vegetables to the point where he would get like severe arthritis-like symptoms. I can assure you a regular Austrian with means is not going to do that job for hours at the time. So anyways, some of the scenes that we encountered, and those were the extreme wings of the Austrian society. So I really want to preface this by there's always extremists everywhere. We would be kicked off the bus because, quote unquote, our bus ticket or our tram ticket was not valid. I started attending Innsbruck University, Leopold Francesca University in Innsbruck. So I actually had a student ticket, which was absolutely valid and perfect. And I would take the tram from Innsbruck to a small village where we used to live. That is a 40-50 minutes ride, and it is through the mountains, through the Alps. So it is not a ride it's not a walk. It's not something that you want to take on yourself, because it's a lot of times during the winter, it's through the snow. Anyways, the conductor, whatever his title was, looked at my ticket and he kicked me off the tram because something was not valid with my ticket. That was actually sadly pretty common. So I ended up walking for a few hours.
He alleged there was something wrong, but
he alleged there was nothing wrong with the ticket. There was nothing wrong with the ticket, but that was one of the typical situations that we as refugees could have encountered. Another scenario that I encountered with a few of my friends was the waiter telling us to leave the restaurant because they don't want, quote unquote, any trouble. Yet again, there were certain extremist members of the Austrian society at the time, and at the time the right-wing party actually won in that particular province. And for every great person that we would encounter, maybe there would be another one that would not be as friendly. So I was standing in the snow, really poetically there, kicked off the tram with a completely valid ticket. And not to mention, even if my ticket was not valid, there were so many different ways of handling that situation, taking me to the next station. It wasn't safe. I felt really powerless, and I felt really humiliated. There were several moments like that, but it was one thing that you expect as a refugee. You don't feel like an equal member of the society. You don't. No one owes you equal rights or equal treatment, and you're basically you come to expect those type of scenarios. And
how did you navigate through that situation?
It's the strength is in the numbers. I didn't feel alone. The reason being is my fellow refugees were experiencing a variety of different things, variety of different subtle or not so subtle humiliating moments. Yet again, you come and you start sharing those experiences, and there is a strength of knowing it's not necessarily something that is just happening to you. You still feel lonely in that moment. You feel angry. But the worst thing is, like, you don't feel that you can turn to anyone to report this. And then you also feel lucky that, that's the least that was done. And which is a weird kind of a conflicting thought that you have.
What got you into academia, and why this position and why now?
Well, I was working at the warehouse, and it was the warehouse that was attached to this mortgage company. So I actually somehow ended up working in the field of mortgages. So I started working for the Merrill Lynch Credit Corporation. So I was in the finance industry, and we were working for the private label company, servicing many different important players: Merrill Lynch, Charles Schwab, USAA, KeyBank, and all those others. So I was working in the mortgage industry, for quite some time, working with the high net worth individuals. And servicing West Coast, even though I live on the East Coast. There's something with me and the West Coast. It seems to me like I always work on the West Coast and I live on the East Coast, which is possible here in the United States. Anyways, make a long story short, I got into a training setting, and I started training, and through doing training, I've discovered my love for learning. I've also discovered my passion to be a storyteller, because if you're a teacher, you're also a storyteller. And I started putting a lot of effort into training, corporate training. For 3 years, I played this balancing game where I was working my quote unquote regular job during the day, and at night I was teaching. And I started doing part-time teaching at some universities here locally. And then in 2013, I made a big move. Financially was a questionable move. I went from a finance industry to a world of education. And starting 2013, I've been in the educational arena. Shortly thereafter, I discovered my love for research. So I started doing research in the developing world in particular. E-learning implementation in the developing world. And that's where I discovered my passion to giving back and being able to relate to different areas of the world where people are struggling and they're becoming successful despite all the odds. So I did several studies based on that theme. What makes entrepreneurs successful? Overcoming all the obstacle variables.
Yes. And how did you land up at the Forbes School of Business?
Well, I started working as a regular professor, regular instructor. And then I became a program chair. So I was managing a program. Then I moved up the ladder to a department chair. My predecessor actually decided to retire last year, so I became an interim dean. And this year in July, I actually, after interview process and everything, I actually was appointed a full-time dean of the Forbes School of Business. Yesterday, someone asked me whether my aspiration was always to be a dean, and I said no. Actually, I could only think as high up as department chair. so I was not. This kind of the last year happened unexpectedly. It was actually a beautiful journey. It was also a bit of a difficult journey, but I'm very eager to see what I can accomplish. And we've done a lot here with the Forbes School of Business and University of Arizona Global Campus. So it's an exciting journey, supportive leadership, and we're doing a lot of terrific projects I'm very happy about.
So can you take us, Maja, through one of those, you alluded to the fact it's been a beautiful journey, but also difficult. What was, can you share with us one of those difficult moments?
There's certain elements of my life that are very ordinary to me. Looking from the outside, they're not ordinary. My husband was wounded in the war as well, and he was severely wounded, and he had 19 plus surgeries. So I met and married my husband, where my husband was already severely disabled. So my entire life, I lived with the individual with severe disabilities, but I don't know that I would even mention it to you if you didn't ask me that specific question. So there are certain challenges associated with that. There is this need for me to be the main, not only necessarily the breadwinner, he was also working as well, but the main force within this household, and taking care of many things that perhaps in my 20s and 30s, women my age did not necessarily had to face, working on medical bills, securing proper medicine that we can afford versus the one that we cannot. Those are the type of situations that many folks encounter in their 50s, 60s, 70s. That was my life in my 20s, waiting outside of the surgery room, making sure he wakes up, being disappointed that every new surgery was actually not bringing him to a better place. And there was a point of time when both of us decided no more surgeries, they cannot help anymore. So coming to that realization that you're losing that hope of getting better, and you just have to make the situation, that is my constant. And I never use it as an obstacle, because that is the life that is the existence I live. That is the life I chose. And
Yeah.
but that is hindsight. I mean, I would imagine that would be difficult for some folks.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry to hear that, Maya. And I'm just curious, given that there are a lot of people dealing with those kinds of issues, what steps did you and your husband take to actually navigate that path from, transitioning out of no more surgeries, we need to park that aspiration and deal with what we have and move forward?
Well, it's he's doing everything that he's able to do, and he is an incredible supportive father, and we were just pouring all of our love and all of our efforts in our children. And like I said, we don't have a reference point of things being different. So that is just our existence. I don't even think that we're conscientiously thinking about these things. We just know, like, from the time I set the table to the time I know there are certain functions he's not able to do, as far as, there's like a washing dishes is actually one of the, he's very helpful, but that's one of the tasks he's not going to be able to help with.
Yeah.
There's no expectations, which side of the table you have to set this up, or, which, there are certain accommodations we made in the house because he's not able to use one of his hands at all. So anyways, I don't think we're focusing on that per se. I don't think it's one of the areas of focus. I am fiercely protective, more so than in normal type of relationships. Sometimes I feel like I have to be his voice, even though he has his voice. So those are the type of things that I think that the relationship naturally progressed to the level of me being this protector.
Yes.
And it's just but like I said, this is not a situation where we met prior to that. So this is kind of a situation that I married into, and absolutely aware of it. And the children, they don't know any different. So this is like a totally normal existence for us.
Of course.
Yeah. So it's but it is an obstacle in a sense of that there are certain cases where, I had to work a couple of different jobs back in the day. And I'm also very aware that I'm the one that has to have I have to be that security blanket for the what if scenario. I think more of what ifs than quote unquote normal people.
Yeah. But practically speaking, I mean, you referenced the fact that you were doing this from the age of 20. So, being a refugee, trying to deal with these huge medical costs and stuff, what were the practical steps that you took to help support you both during that time?
Everyone that knows me will jokingly tell you, they ask you a question: how many jobs does Maya need to feel secure? So there were times in my 20s, 30s, I was working 6-7 jobs.
Wow.
And I was constantly thinking in terms of medicine, like making sure that, medicine is taken care of, children are taken care of, what ifs. And that is, I have a full-time job, but there's always there's this contract here, contract there, consulting here, consulting there. And I actually, and this is so silly to even draw this comparison, my grandfather went through he was born in 1929. So he went through the hunger years of after the Great Depression and everything. And he had this thing with stocking up our pantry with so much food. So we grew up, like I said, my childhood was very idyllic. We were never hungry, and I could never understand, why is this man equipping us for something will happen tomorrow. The saddest thing about his pantry is we lost that house within days. So we lost the pantry, so that his supplies helped someone, but they did not help my family. So help whoever took over our house. But so that tells you the silliness of that notion that you can actually put material things on the side to help you being rescued. But in my case, it's not pantry. In my case, is making sure you have that extra layer of savings for what if there's another surgery? What if, I think that there is that heightened sense of the catastrophic scenarios that you normally, a well-balanced person should not have those scenarios.
Yes. So you referenced your grandfather. At 4 or 5, he was asking you about what are the big problems in the world. Let's fast forward. In your view today, what are the big problems in the world? What keeps you concerned about what needs to be done?
Well, I think I'm afraid of hate that is happening within the world. I think the ethnic tensions, religious tensions, there's so much of the vile rhetoric happening across the world right now, and because of us being able to access information, there's no filtering. Everyone can access everything. There's these crazy conspiracy theories left and right. They're dividing us. They're taking us further apart. And I am afraid of the world that is so divided in so many different areas. And we were talking about, we reflected on refugees, and I said, absolutely, I'm thankful with the way Ukraine refugees were welcomed and embraced by the European countries. I would have loved to see the same treatment of refugees coming from different parts of the world, because a refugee is a refugee. Ukraine mom and a mom from Congo, they're moms with babies in their arms. Sure. And they're trying to rescue their children. So there's absolutely no difference. So I'm afraid of the global tensions when it comes to just a lot of extreme rhetoric that I'm seeing. Yeah. I'm seeing it in Europe. I'm watching European news quite a bit. I'm seeing it here in the United States. I'm seeing it in many different parts of the world. The us versus them, whoever us is versus them logic. I'm afraid of that. And you're doing so much work, so much good work pertaining to the Mandela style of leadership. And there is this thing. I wish we can. Well, Mandela is someone that is born once in a few centuries, right? But I wish that we have that clear world leader that is spreading the message of hope and message of equality and love. I don't see that clear candidate right now in the world. So we have to go with the teachings of those men and women who are no longer with us.
Yeah. So to that point, Maja, to what extent do you think Mandela's leadership, life and leadership example are relevant today? And what do you think, based on what you have gleaned about Mandela and some of the parallels you have drawn, what do you think Mandela would say to the world today?
I know of him from the books and movies. I don't necessarily, I cannot pretend to even remotely understand his personality type when he's surrounding himself with his friends and his family. I will venture out to say that he would be upset. I would venture out to say that he would be really disheartened with what's happening right now, because there are so many things happening in the world that are totally anti the principles. And we're talking about Mandela, we're talking about Mahatma Gandhi, we're talking about the Dr. King. I think all three of those men, I think they would give us a good lecture, because we lost our ways. And I think that but they would probably, I would say that Mandela would probably tell us he would have to re-emphasize his message, because there are many pockets of the world where messages such as Mandela's message has been lost. I consider Mandela's message the one of hope, the one of love. Absolutely, the one of equality, the fairness, the concept of fairness. And I think he would have to tell us his message more. And you know what? And frankly, during the educational system, we touch upon some of those great people, but I don't know that we're necessarily getting into the philosophy of their thoughts. And I don't think that our young people are really fully understanding it. It seems to me that the nowadays, with the age of, everyone's on TikTok, on Instagram, and this and that, there's so many superficial things that our young people are really laser focusing on. Yeah. You know what, as I'm talking about this, something comes to my mind. We are in need of a movement. We are in need of a movement. And that is what you were talking about, that whole global movement where pursuit of these ideals becomes cool again. And I use the word cool because that's what young people relate to.
Of course.
Because look at and I'm not trying to oversimplify, because, like every generation will find its way. But it's like when you talk to a young person right now, and I have a teenager, my daughter's a teenager. It's like ideals that are put forth for her generation, the materialistic things, travel, makeup tutorials to no end. Is there a place for all that? Yeah, sure, it's all good entertainment, but that cannot be it for those young minds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think you're so right, Maya. And that's why all these co-founders have come together from around the world. And the common thread is that, all of us have been touched in some way by Mandela's life and leadership and legacy. And, we understand in some way that it requires a movement. And, his story, South Africa's story, was enabled and empowered by a global movement for change. So it's interesting you make reference, and I'm just very inspired by your role in this impact and change. And turning a little to some of the academic work you're doing, because you made a really good point. I mean, I know you're part of Globe Research, which looks at culture and researches culture, and you talk about, your fear of hate and these deep divides in the world. Can you share a little with us around what inspired you to do this work around Globe Research and cultures, and what are some of the key takeaways?
I actually started doing research in 2013. I went into full-time world of academia, and within a year or so, I started doing some small-scale research ventures. I was very fortunate that our university was providing research grants. They were not necessarily substantial in terms of, we're not talking enough money to have a team, but I was able to do different research ventures across the world. Through that, I went into becoming a Fulbright specialist. So I did one research as a co-investigator, one as an investigator. And we were actually exploring the leadership style that was a good fit for the Southern African region, because there's this whole, the colonial baggage and its impact still on the leadership in Africa. And we were talking about what is the unique path that we were talking about Zambia, that Zambian leaders have to take, where they're not mimicking their Western counterparts. They're actually focusing on what works within the Zambian context. So later on, I was approached by the Globe researchers because they were lacking data from one country in particular. So I was a co-investigator in Zambia, and they were studying the cultural practices and leadership practices across the globe. And funny enough, and I told you this, and when we had this meeting, there were so many folks that were co-investigators, investigators of a particular country, but they were not actually from that country. So I was able to get the data from Zambia rather quickly with all the contacts that I had. The research is not fully done as of yet. So we're still in the phase of data being gathered and research being processed. But the point is to come up with some patterns, some trends of leadership practices across the world, yet again, with the understanding one size does not fit all. But there are certain themes. There are certain themes that are applicable across the globe.
Yeah. And when will that be revealed?
Well, the main investigators are the ones that are putting all this together, and they're going to start doing the first round of presentations and first round of articles. So I would imagine that will happen. Some of it started happening this year, but I would imagine in the next 2-year period. Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. So shifting gear a little, just some fun facts, Maya.
Yeah.
What was one of your favorite favorite moments with your grandfather?
We had this popular picnic area. It's called Vrelo Bosne. It's actually it's like a place where people of Sarajevo go during weekends, and you would actually have a horse-drawn carriage taking you through these magnificent trees. So we would take that carriage, and then I would pretend to be a princess, and he would just make a big fuss of opening doors for me and handing me his hand. And then we would go to eat at this by the river. And he was always making a big deal out of me as far as the way I was dressed, the way it was actually semi-ridiculous when you see some of my childhood pictures, because I was literally the girliest girl that you can ever see. And I was always dressed, and my hair was always done. And so that was my favorite memory, him taking me there. The other favorite memory was him brushing my hair. I had an incredibly curly hair, and no one could do it. Just grandpa could do it. He would actually sometimes spend 30 minutes or so brushing my hair so it doesn't hurt. And he would do it like, and then he would tell me stories, and he was absolutely magnificent. And he was always telling me that I can do whatever I want to do, which at the time I could not understand. And he kept telling me, you have to have your own money. I remember him telling me this. You have to be independent, and you can do whatever you want to do. Whatever any man can do, you can do. He was way advanced for his age and his time, because of the fact that it's still a patriarchal society. I did not realize that it was telling me this because I was a girl. And he was really big on, I have to be independent, and I have to have my own money. I remember that all the time. You have to have your own money. And now that we do different gender studies and different stories pertaining to equality of gender equity and all that good stuff, one of the things that is preventing women worldwide from being equal is the fact that they don't have access to their own funds. So I always think of him, because it was, his message was always inspirational, hope, and this and that. And then it was that whole money thing that I couldn't, even as a child, I couldn't fit it in. I was like, why is he telling me about my own money? You know?
Well, very pragmatic, and it stuck. It stuck. Your mother ran a pub. Do you drink beer? What's your favorite beer?
I'm a once in a 6 month, like one alcoholic beverage person. I would say that Blue Moon would be my beverage of choice if we're talking beer, which some beer drinkers would disagree that's even a beer. But that's, let's say if I don't have a social event in like a year, I probably wouldn't touch alcohol in a year. So, but I would say Blue Moon with some orange. Yeah.
Okay. And tell me, share one place, what is one part about the state of Arizona, an experience or a place that has brought you great joy, and why?
Well, I live in Florida, but I'd go to Arizona all the time because of my work. Sedona. Sedona's actually, out of all travels, Sedona is the most spiritual place that I've ever encountered. I'm not a paid agent by the tourist agency in Sedona, but I recommend to all of your viewers and listeners to go to Sedona at least once. And I know people who usually go to Grand Canyon. I'm sure it's terrific, but I'm saying Sedona is Red Rocks of Sedona. The most amazing spiritual place. It's a place to meditate, a place to reflect. That is actually my top place in the whole world.
Really?
Not just you just asked about Arizona because of the university, and I'm telling you, that is my top place actually.
And why?
It's just that the peace and quiet, even though it's touristy, you can find a spot where you're all alone and looking at the red rocks and looking at the sun reflection on those red rocks, and there's just something so incredibly peaceful. It's such a good place for reflection, and it's an amazing beauty. You're looking at those rocks and you're saying to yourself, I cannot believe that nature actually created this. Very spiritual. And it's very hard to pinpoint as to why. There's just something there.
There's something there. I love that. Coming back to a slightly more serious note, or maybe not, because, leadership can be fun too. What is your definition of leadership?
Well, I think that I'm very closely aligned to the concept of servant leadership, but I'm going to expand this by saying that empathetic leadership is what I think is at the very core, because unless you have empathy, unless you have an understanding of what others are, what are they bringing to the table, what are their aspirations, their dreams, their goals, it's incredibly hard to lead. So one of the first things that I've done as a dean is I started doing this focus groups with all of my faculty, and it's a very small groups, and I know that it's anything incredibly innovative, but it's I just want to meet my faculty. It's not practical to do it on a one-on-one basis all the time because of the numbers, but I try to meet them in like groups of 3 or 4, and we touch upon work, but we're steering away from work, getting to know each other. Telling each other stories pertaining to our lives, understanding where we're coming from, what motivates us, what our passions are. And then I also ask them, what are some of your things, your area of passion that we're not utilizing at all? you never shared with us, and we're not even understanding that this may be an area that you would like to go into. So having that level of understanding others, and that I did so much research on perception, just understanding what I'm projecting, what I'm trying for people to see, and also understanding where they're coming from with what they're perceiving as I'm interacting with them. I think those are the type of things that I'm really actively working on. And and having a sense of empathy. There's a lot of studies talking about the female versus male leadership, and if you do XYZ, you're going to be perceived as weak versus strong, assertive. I don't care about those labels. I don't care about those labels, because if people trust you, if people think that you care, or well, not people think, if you truly care, because you cannot fake caring, they're more likely to be motivated. Every team that I was ever part of, I was able to get people to do things, sometimes even more difficult things, and spending more hours because of the way I was approaching them. I'm polar opposite from what one would consider micromanager. And that style only works for a short period of time. It can get, when people say it can get the job done, yes, for a very short period of time. And then what happens?
And just, an extension of that conversation, how would you define bold leadership? And why do you think bold leadership is relevant today?
As our university, we went through a lot of uncertainties in the last few years. Then, of course, globally, as a society, global society, went through so many uncertainties in the last few years. Bold leadership is making decisions that sometimes are not popular for the betterment of the entire organization. Bold leadership is standing firm in your decision making, within your decision making process, but being able to explain it. Bold leadership is politely. I don't believe in any sort of a crazy discourse where you're arguing with someone, but I would say professionally and politely explaining your stance and staying firm in your stance, not changing your views or opinions just because for whatever reason someone's going after it, and as long as you have all the facts. And bold leadership is also making decisions with the facts to back you up. I'm a researcher. If you don't have the facts, I don't believe in a gut feeling leadership approaches. Can gut feeling be helpful once or twice? Absolutely, sure. But I get really uncomfortable with leaders that are they're just winging it 24/7. They may get lucky, but they may not. And that's an uncertainty that I'm not willing to necessarily subscribe to.
And how relevant is bold leadership today?
Well, I think bold leadership, I don't know of a time period when bold leadership wasn't relevant. But I definitely don't want to go into US politics, but I'm going to touch upon it in very brief terms, general terms. We're no longer having bold leaders. Everyone is just thinking about the next election cycle. Everyone's just thinking, pleasing their constituents. I'm still craving to see one person that steers away from everyone else and just lead. So there is a crisis when it comes to the concepts of bold leadership. So bold leadership was always relevant, but I really think that's when we were talking about the global leaders. I cannot think, honestly, and when you think about global leaders of today, there's not one single one that is to the point that can really lead this world. It's no one is as inspirational. No one is as strong. No one is as bold. We don't have a clear leader right now.
Well, perhaps it's up to all of us. I'm hopeful that they will emerge. And sometimes, as you say, Maja, to the point you made right near the beginning, that you encourage your students and stuff, that it's about making impact within your community and sphere of influence. And who would have thought that a rural village boy in the Mvezo Valley in the southern tip of the African continent would go on to be one of the greatest iconic leaders of all time. We never know where they come from, but I think it is about the collective leadership. And I love what you said about the fact that it is about making that impact within your sphere of influence. So that we are empowered. we are able to take that bold stand in communities where it matters. You're doing it, you're doing it so well. And I so look forward to learning more and hearing more about the research, and truly your stories are really empowering. And I think in our final moments, are there any final thoughts you have about leading boldly into the future, and any final thoughts around what you would like to say to our generation and the next?
Yeah, I think you can't lead boldly without having passion. So people, a lot of times they mix up the concept of leadership with the concept of their daily jobs. If your passion is matching your job, and you are able to do what you're passionate about in the venues of your job, you're an incredibly fortunate person. So in order for you to be bold, you do have to believe in what you're doing. You have to have an incredible passion pertaining to what you're doing. And hopefully, one would hope, you're doing it for the good. And you're able to define how everyone's lives are at least a little bit better from encountering you. Sometimes I, like yourself, Anne, when we met just the other day, I felt so energized having talked to you. And we're all in this pursuit of this incredible human experience. And thanks to online setting and being able to do all these webinars and Zoom and stuff, now we're able to encounter individuals that in normal situations prior to all this, we wouldn't be able to. So you're expanding your horizons. I always tell my students, well, that was one of the things that my grandfather would always ask me after school. I would come back from school. And by the way, I never told you that he always smiled when he saw me. I never, ever remember him not smiling when he saw me. So it was such a welcome. And he would say to me, what have you learned today? And I would tell him what I've learned. And then he said, what can you do to help others with what you have learned? And that is kind of a, sometimes it was some of my silly answers. Don't think that I was answering in a poetic fashion, Anne. Sometimes we learned about cells in biology. Well, what can you do? And I'm like, I have no idea. I said it was pretty gross. So I don't want you to think those were these conversations where if he had this wonderful question that I always had a wonderful answer. Sometimes it was like,
you were a good student in training, Maja.
Yeah, I was like, what am I going to do with this knowledge of cells? They were gross. I remember saying that, right? And because I was never attracted to the medical profession. I have such a respect for medical professionals, but you could tell very early on, there's no medical doctor in the house, okay?
Yeah.
So those are the type of things. So I tell my students, a lot of times I tell my students, what's your job versus what's your passion? What is the intersection of your job and your passion? And what can you do to make your community better? What can you do to make your neighborhood better? If you think in those terms, everything you do is incredibly rewarding. And then you can actually be a bold leader. And by the way, when we put a leadership label, you don't have to be, and this is important because I tell my students this, you don't have to have a title of a leader to lead. Going back to my refugee years, I remember a gentleman who was incredibly important to me during the refugee years. He actually passed since, and he was the leader of that center. No one gave him a title, leader of the center, but we would all come to him asking him questions. He would make decisions pertaining to heating, getting supplies, allocating aid. He was a bold leader out of our respect towards him. And he was not, Rashid was his name. And he was the one that, as I was getting married, he was the one that took me out of the center. He was like serving this role as a father. And he was the father of all the young girls and boys at the center. And he did it, he had a very quiet voice. He would always, I don't recall him ever raising his voice. He was demanding respect through his actions and the level of trust we had, because we always knew if he gave us an advice, it's going to be advice to better our lives. It's never going to be something, he was never self-serving. Yeah, so that is a bold leader to me. A bold leader is not a fierce. Sometimes we mix up these terms, bold equaling fierce, assertive, strong. That's not always the case. Mandela was a bold leader that had that same soothing presence, that had that same soft-spoken demeanor, that had that same kindness about him. And that is actually, to me, the boldest of the bold as far as leadership.
Yes, yeah. Well, Maja, it's been such a joy to talk to you. And yes, the boldest of the bold. I think you join that category of one of the boldest of the bold. And just thank you for sharing your passion with us today. And I'm so excited about all the work we're going to be doing together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Anne.
Our riveting conversation with the Forbes School of Business and Technology Dean and Dr. Maja Zelihic reveals a remarkable story of tragedy over triumph, a road less traveled and an unexpected fate. Friday, April the 6th, 1992, a deadly war broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, part of the former Federation of States in the former Yugoslavia in southeastern Europe. It was also the date that Maja experienced her most beautiful and last day in high school in the capital city of Sarajevo. A boy she liked complimented her on her fine performance in the final dress rehearsal of their high school play, a well-rehearsed role she never got to perform. Her pivotal moment was when her beloved grandfather, her champion, her cheerleader, watched the troops of separatist competing nationalist forces march into the city, their boots crunching on the cobbled streets. And he said, "My country is dead." In just 5 days, Maja and her family lost their home. Their family was separated. Intruders raped the woman, and deadly deaths of men, women, and children lined the streets. 100,000 killed and 2 million more fled. Globally in the world today, around 3.5% of an 8 billion human population, that is around 218 million people, are desperately displaced by warring conflicts, by climate crises, and by people experiencing shortages of water and famine. Good people like Maja, in search of food and shelter and safety, and who want to build a better future. In Maja's own words, she was one of the fortunate ones. She escaped the deadly war. She went west. She spent 3 years in an Austrian refugee camp, and with the help of the Lutheran Church, she made her way to the United States of America. So many lawful immigrant refugees like Maja work hard, embrace a new culture, and rise to the top. She held down 6 to 7 jobs. She celebrated Thanksgiving. She interconnected and connected with everyday American people at work, at church, and in her neighborhood. So let's face the unvarnished truth. Any one of us could face a similar unexpected fate. A refugee is a refugee, anyone from any land at any time. And the United States of America, like multiple nations, have been built on the grit, the hard work, and the rise to the top of lawful immigrant refugees. It is time for us to refocus, to focus more on those in power who are creating these global mass migrations, rather than fearing and demonizing lawful immigrant refugees like Dean and Dr. Maja Zelihic. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time. One step for you, but together, a giant step for humanity. So take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.